The Russians only have 2 million troops that can play that role, and they are irreplaceable, and once they are deployed, that is it. Russia is done. It is Russia's last war.
The Russians have announced what they call a partial mobilization of about 300,000 troops. We may be seeing the beginning of the Russians' end here. It is still the Russians' war to lose. The Russian space is incredibly low value. The agriculture that exists there is very poor by global standards, so they've never been able to generate the amount of capital that's necessary to have a real road network. If you want to get anything moved from A to B, it's going to almost exclusively go by train, which is part of the reasons why logistics in the Russian army have become so poor, especially in the Ukraine conflict, and why the Ukrainians were able to take a couple of rail depots in eastern Ukraine, in Kharkiv, a couple weeks ago, and the front just collapsed. In fact, there's signs that we might be seeing a repeat of that elsewhere in the Donbass, as the Russians are now discovering that they're actually outnumbered locally, and that with all the captured equipment, the Ukrainians actually now have more artillery and more ammo. So if you take a poorly trained, conscripted force in Russia that is badly equipped and put it against a very motivated and enlarging force that is getting better training from abroad and better equipment from abroad, in addition to the captured stuff, all of a sudden, at least for now, the balance of forces has really changed.
The Russian collapse on every point of contact has been so extreme and so total that it's very difficult for even people who follow this issue full time to keep track of what's going on. The very, very short version is that over the course of the last couple of months, the Ukrainians have advertised that they're going to launch a major invasion, counterattack in the Kherson region in an attempt to reclaim that territory. And we're going to include a link here as to what they were thinking with that. The Russians do not have the technical expertise to operate the reservoirs, and it's just a question of whether this stuff goes offline in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. We don't know. We've never had the sort of collapse of technical workers in an oil zone ever before, so we don't know how fast to expect it to go offline. But we know for sure that the Russians can't do it, and we know for sure that the Chinese can't do it. You go west of the Urals, and the picture is somewhat different. There, the Russians do have the technical skills to maintain most of the output. The problem is infrastructure. And if we have a significant interruption in the flows, then pressure will build back up to the wellhead. And in the permafrost, that means that the wells get damaged, and it can take decades to repair that. So based on what happens with sanctions in the war, that can go to 0 too, but it's subject to a lot of things that will happen beyond Russia. So in the east, you know it's going to go offline. The question is the timing. In the west, it's probably going to go offline, but it's subject to things that have almost nothing to do with the war. Which brings us to Alberta. Now, Alberta has been producing crude for a few decades, and their crude is a little non-standard. It's mined. The Russian military is not well trained. It is not well equipped. Its logistics suck. They can't fight outside of rail systems because that's how they transport all of their material. And that's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are doing so well here, is that they've taken out some of the rail depots or captured them, and leaving the Russians to know that they've been completely cut off from resupply and reinforcements. However, Russia has won about half of the wars that it has fought. And in every single one of the wars that it has fought, that it has won, there have been moments like what is going on right now. Because what happens is the Russians move in, they get sucker punched, superior forces in terms of either number or more likely technology and logistics and morale and training, destroy them. The Ukrainian position, the Russian position collapses, the Russians retreat, or more likely that military division is simply obliterated. And then back in Mother Russia, there is a bit of a regeneration, and a new force comes in with different tactics and different leadership and better equipment. And then the numbers turn. Remember that the Russians still, at least on paper, have a military force that's over 10 times the size of Ukraine. They've got more tanks, they've got more artillery, they've got more aircraft. Everything on paper suggests that this is still the Russians' war to lose. So yeah, they've had a really crappy week, and a lot of us are cheering that this continues, but we should not bet on that. The question is, how fast can the Russian system adjust? And there's really no way to judge that, because the Putin government has such a tight information lockdown in Russia proper. We really can't even gauge that. The second question that in the long run is going to be far more important is whether or not this is the end. The Russian demographic is so far beyond terminal that I've long thought that this was going to be their last war. Now, they still have the numerical advantage over Ukraine, which is even in a worse demographic situation. So in a fight between two maimed countries, Russia still has all the cards.
This is the generation that was born in the 1990s and early 2000s. The Cold War collapse. That's draftable age. Yes, the Russians can probably take the country with 130,000 troops, take Ukraine. But they can't hold it. You guys know that from the experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Occupying's not easy when the population doesn't want you there. It's a country of 45 million people. That's Iraq plus Afghanistan. And unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, where the population concentrations were pretty tight, Ukraine is farmland. Not possible with 130,000 troops. You're talking 2 million troops. The Russians only have 2 million troops that can play that role. And they are irreplaceable. And once they are deployed, that is it. Russia is done.